they challenge the existence of our democracy by trying to use their ability to vote shares as a shortcut around the ballot box to enact things like these green energy policies that really can't get enacted by a popular vote because they're not popular. Quite honestly, they use our money to do it. They're using money from pension funds, 401ks, mutual funds that many, many people are invested in. They use those monies to gain control of these companies and these CEOs. This ESG investing, which is what we're talking about, this woke capitalism, it is socialism in sheep's clothing. You really hurt working in middle-class Americans. You hurt people with lower income. Rich people are going to be fine no matter what happens, which is why they fly their jets to Davos and all over the world, emitting all kind of carbon emissions without anybody saying much critical about them.
We're here at the annual ALEC meeting of state senators in Atlanta, Georgia. We're delighted to be joined by Andy Puzder. He's the former chief executive officer of CKE Restaurants as the parent company of Hardee's and Carl's Jr. He's now the chairman of Second Vote Advisors. Andy, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
A pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can I get your thoughts on the GDP data that just dropped?
Yeah, it was a disaster. Now, they called it a technical recession. That's like saying that, the St. Louis Cardinals had 10 runs, the New York Yankees had 8 runs, and therefore the Cardinals technically won. They won by the rules, if that's what technically means. We're in a recession. We are no doubt in a recession. But I think the American people knew that 2 or 3 months ago. They've been living through really the worst economic recession since at least the late 1970s. And back then I was in my late 20s, early 30s, so I remember that period of time. And this actually feels worse than it felt then. And then I was a young lawyer. I didn't have a lot of money. I had a family. Now I'm feeling fairly secure in my retirement, and it still seems worse to me than it was back then. So we are in a very serious recession. It was brought about by the economic policies of Joe Biden. He inherited an economy that was on a V-shaped recovery, and he's turned it into, looks like it's going to be a W until we get another maybe Republican president in there to take it back up again.
Do you feel that the administration is seriously thinking about inflation, give the reconciliation bill? What do you think about the timing of this reconciliation bill coming out?
The deal that Manchin agreed to yesterday really results in the government spending more money. Now, the government spending money is what got us in trouble to begin with. Back in March of 2021, they passed the Democrats passed on their own without any Republicans, a $1.9 trillion spending spree, even though we didn't need it. The pandemic was over. People had gotten a ton of money during the pandemic. Larry Summers, a Democrat economist from Harvard, warned that would spike inflation. It spiked inflation, and now we're dealing with the end results of that. What you could do is not only try and bring demand down, which means you're hurting the people that are creating the demand, which is working and middle-class Americans. They're consumers. They're the ones that are creating the demand. You're going to hurt them to bring the demand down. The other thing you could do is increase the supply side. That doesn't really hurt anybody. You could encourage businesses to produce goods, to generate economic growth. And that you can do that by making, rather than proposing new taxes, make the Trump tax cuts permanent. That would help. Reduce regulations, not increase them. And the Biden administration has been on a regulation spree, just more regulation on top of regulation, which doesn't encourage businesses to produce more goods. The last thing you could do is encourage domestic energy production, because the cost of energy impacts everything. Everything you buy, everything you see gets delivered. So it isn't just things that actually have petrochemicals as part of what makes them up, like gasoline or various plastic products. It's everything gets delivered. So if you focus on domestic energy supply, increasing domestic energy, you focus on reducing regulation and decreasing taxes, you can build the supply side up, which will mean we don't have to decrease the demand as much. I don't think the Biden administration can do that politically. I think they probably know it's what they need to do. I just don't think they're capable of doing it.
Why?
Because they will alienate their base. Right now, I just checked 2 minutes ago, Joe Biden's approval rating on Real Clear Politics is in the 37% range. Well, that's basically Biden and his family, and a few progressive Democrats. I mean, this is your base. If he loses his base, he's got nothing. And he is now down to his base. Nobody ever gets lower than 37, 38% in these approval ratings, because your base is going to say they support you. Even if they disagree with you, they're not going to say they support somebody else. They're going to say they support you. So he's lost independents. He's clearly lost Republicans. And if he starts taking these policies that actually could fix things, he might get some independence back, but he's going to lose his base. The Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez crowd, Elizabeth Warren crowd, Bernie Sanders crowd is going to run away from him. And I don't think he can afford to do that politically right now.
I think it's an interesting spot he's in because I think the number one concern for Americans is inflation by far.
Yes, and it's certainly not the number one concern of the Democratic Party. I mean, they're concerned about abortion. They're concerned about making sure transgenders have rights. They're concerned about keeping teachers in control of kids in schools. They're concerned about things that really aren't at the heart and soul of what the American people are concerned about, which is why you see so many studies and so many commentators coming out and saying that the Republicans have become the party of the working class. They really have. Donald Trump, whatever he might have done, positive or negative, he turned the Republican Party into a blue-collar working-class party, and that's going to be very powerful for the party going forward.
I want to read a quote to you from this new deal. They want to reduce carbon emissions in the United States by roughly 40% by 2030. It's 8 years away. What do you think?
I think you can't do that without destroying the economy. And when you increase the price of energy, which is what this would do, you really hurt working and middle-class Americans. You hurt people with lower incomes. Rich people are going to be fine no matter what happens, which is why they fly their jets to Davos and all over the world, burning up, emitting all kind of carbon emissions without anybody saying much critical about them. The problem with this is you would destroy the economy, you would hurt working and middle-class families. Look, the United States is the world's leader in environmental protections. When they talk about China stealing our technology, I wish they'd steal our anti-pollution technology. I mean, what we really should be doing if we want to reduce carbon emissions is something like nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a great reducer of carbon. So why does the left oppose it? Well, I think it's actually too good at reducing these carbon emissions, and it doesn't allow them to execute this ridiculous anti-carbon agenda that they're pursuing at all costs. This is not a good idea. It is not going to meaningfully reduce carbon emissions at all, even if you assume that they're harmful and that's what we want to achieve. If you want to do that, you'd be talking about natural gas, nuclear energy. You wouldn't be talking about these programs to generate energy with sunshine and rainbows, wind and solar. You'd be talking about ways to really produce energy, and you'd be trying to get our trading partners to do the same. We're affected by Asian pollution in the United States. That's going to be a bigger problem for us than pollution from the United States, because we're the ones that are leading the world in reducing pollution. This is wrong thinking. It's going to pour money into the economy at a time when we need to not pour money into the economy. Seriously, if the Fed's trying to reduce demand and reduce consumer spending, why would you spend $500 billion if you're the government on top of what's already being sent? This is just nonsense. It's nonsense, and I really hope it doesn't get passed.
Brian Deese, one of the top economic advisors to the president, he said, quote, "We're preserving the liberal world order." What does that mean?
Well, this is the Davos, the Great Reset, where the elitists are going to try and take control of our democracies, our economic freedom, and our individual liberty. And they're doing it through things like ESG, the E being the environmental part of this, which comes through on this bill. I mean, they do it, they challenge our democratic values. They challenge the existence of our democracy by trying to use their ability to vote shares, their stock ownership, as a shortcut around the ballot box to enact things like these green energy policies that really can't get enacted by a popular vote because they're not popular. They then threaten our economic freedom by pressuring CEOs of companies across the country to place these progressive agenda items like these climate change agenda items above their obligation to generate returns for shareholders. And they challenge our economic freedom because, quite honestly, they use our money to do it. They're using money from pension funds, 401ks, mutual funds that many, many people are invested in. They use those monies to gain control of these companies and these CEOs. And it's a big threat to our democracy, our economic freedom, and our individual liberty.
If it weren't for organizations like yours and people here at ALEC and others who are opposing this quote-unquote liberal world order, Davos, Great Reset, etc., what would the end result be?
A world controlled by a bunch of either government or corporate elites who think they know better how to run our lives than we know. And really the destruction of the capitalist free market economic system, which quite honestly, and Barack Obama admitted this in 2016 in a lecture he gave at Georgetown University, free market capitalism has created more wealth and lifted more people out of poverty than any economic system in human history. This has been a miracle. The past 200 years have been a miracle in human history. The way that people's standards of living have improved under free market capitalism. It's a very effective system. It's also a very moral system. The only way you succeed in a capitalist free market economy is by meeting the needs of other people. You know, whether you're Steve Jobs coming up with the Apple computer and the iPhone, or you're Jeff Bezos with Amazon, or Henry Ford with cars for the average Americans, not just for rich people. These entrepreneurs are all out there meeting other people's needs as the way to improve their own lives. They profit by meeting other people's needs. That creates an incredible energy, an incredible dynamic energy that really lifts everybody. This Davos reset, this attempt to put the elites in charge of our lives, these people who think they know more about how our lives should be run than we do, that will be a destruction of our freedom. It will be destruction of our economic freedom, our political freedom, and our independence.
Larry Kudlow has called it global socialism. You think it's a fair assessment?
Good phrase. I think that's a very good definition. This ESG investing, which is what we're talking about, this woke capitalism, it is socialism in sheep's clothing. It's simply an attempt by corporate and government elites to use the American private sector as a tool to avoid the messiness and inconvenience that they see in our democracy and our free market economic system. And this has been a goal of socialists going back 200 years to the days of Karl Marx, where he came up with these ideas. This is what they've been trying to do. They're consistent, they're devious, they act in a very broad-based manner, and so far, at least in my lifetime, and I guess since he came up with these ideas, even though they've gained momentum, once we saw what they were doing, once they stuck their heads above water, we were able to beat them back. This ALEC meeting, I think, will be a part of beating back this attempt to take away our freedoms and our liberties. And hopefully it will be successful. It has been in the past. I hope it will be in the future.
But the private sector is supposed to be opposed to socialism, to Marxism. What happened? What changed?
So groups like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who went into something called index investing, which meant that you invested in a group of companies based upon the characteristics of the group, not the individual performance of each company. So it used to be we had activist investing, where you'd invest in a 401k plan with a financial advisor, and there would be somebody in there analyzing each company. These index investors, since they didn't have to analyze each company, could offer their products much less expensively. And because they invested in broad sectors like the S&P 500, which is basically every large American company, that the results would be good. The results were very productive. So in that process, the people that went forward with index investing, like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, got a tremendous amount of assets under management. So that they now control, if you look at BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they control $22 trillion in investment assets. If you add their shareholdings together, they are the #1 shareholder in 80% of the companies in the S&P 500. So they control companies that compete with each other. They control Exxon, they control Chevron. You know, they control companies that normally you would think would be competing and may compete on the product line, but ideologically, with respect to their goals, they're dominated by shareholders who come in and threaten them with an adverse shareholder vote, as happened with Exxon. Vanguard and State Street got together with a little hedge fund called Engine Number One that proposed putting 3 environmentalists on Exxon's board. Now Exxon has 3 environmentalists on its board because the State Street, because BlackRock and Vanguard voted with that little hedge fund. They're getting out of certain leases around the world, particularly one in Southeast Asia and one in Mexico, where PetroChina is now coming in, and they're investing in these oil fields that Exxon's walking away from. And guess who's a 6% shareholder in Exxon, in PetroChina? BlackRock. I mean, this is an attack on the American free enterprise system, and it's a huge danger. You know, Abraham Lincoln once said that America could never be defeated by an outside enemy, that we would live on forever as free people. We would be able to deal with foreign challenges. It was the internal challenge if we were going to fall, it was going to be by suicide. And what we're seeing now with ESG investing and these efforts on the left, this great reset, the liberal world order that Dee's referred to, this is that internal threat. This is the threat that could bring us down. And so we need to stand up and resist it immediately.
How is Second Vote Advisors doing that?
Well, we've got a product, for example, called Shareholders First. We're competing, we compete essentially with BlackRock, State Street and Vanguard, although we're really little compared to them. They've been around a long time, they're huge. We're trying to build investment, but right now we're small. One of our products that I think I'm most excited about is called Shareholders First. And what we do is we take there's a data research firm that looks at every company in the S&P 1500 and rates them either liberal, which is a 1, leans liberal a 2, neutral a 3, leans right a 4, right is a 5. So it rates them from conservative to liberal, with 3 being neutral. Our Shareholders First product only invests in companies that rate a 3. Because we want companies that are focused not on politics, but are focused on profits, on returns for shareholders. Our theory being, this is the investment thesis is, companies focused on profits will be more profitable than companies that aren't. Now, I normally say that and people look at me like then they start to laugh because they realized, what a patently obvious statement it was. But I say, look, people think I'm going to say something else, but that's kind of it. I mean, it's hard enough to make a profit when you're focused on it, let alone when you're focused on trying to change the world consistent with some leftist agenda. So our Shareholders First product, we have an index, and we will soon be coming out with an ETF, an exchange-traded fund. But so far, since we came out with the index last year, the index has outperformed both the S&P 500 and the Russell 1000, proving, I think, that companies that focus on profit actually do make more money than companies that don't. I think we're in pretty secure ground there, and we'll continue to pursue it. But we're trying to come up with products where conservatives can invest, independents can invest, and not feel like their monies are going to support causes and political objectives that they personally don't support. That's really the danger of that ESG investing. They advance this liberal leftist agenda, and they use our money to do it. I mean, this is really a socialist dream, and they're pursuing it as actively as they can.
To beat the market is impressive.
Well, we've been able to do that, and hopefully, past performance is no guarantee of future performance. I have to say that I am a lawyer after all, but so far so good. We're feeling very good about the investment.
So we have Governor Ron DeSantis saying to Tucker Carlson last night that maybe all the states will band together and oppose or not give their money to the State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard to allow them to do political things. Are you hoping organizations like yourselves could potentially get some of this money?
Sure, we would be happy to take those investments on, but I think the important part is to pass. Well, it's important that these monies get invested with investment firms that will be focused on generating returns for the beneficiaries of those funds. That's what we want to see. That's why we invest in neutral companies. But it's also important that states, to achieve that objective, and I've had numerous discussions with people on the DeSantis team about this, but we need to get states focused on passing this ALEC legislation, this state fiduciary legislation that imposes these fiduciary obligations on the people who manage funds for these various states to invest them in the best interest of the people that are beneficiaries of those funds, the best interest of the people of those states, rather than on achieving these leftist political goals. And I think that's what Governor DeSantis is talking about, and I think ALEC has got a couple pieces of legislation up there that can really go a long way to achieving those goals.
Does that become subjective? Can these companies turn around and say something like, well, climate change could do X, Y, Z within 10 years, so we have to divest from oil companies. It's for our investors' own benefit. Are we hearing this type of narrative?
Yeah, you will hear that, but it's bunk. It's just, I mean, how can you argue that it's in Exxon's best interest that it starts investing in windmills? I mean, this is a company, oil is shooting through the roof. Exxon's one of the largest energy producers, oil producers in the world. You're going to tell me anybody could rationally argue that it's in their investors' best interest for them to stop producing carbon fuels? I mean, it's an absurd argument. It won't hold water, and I'm hoping what this legislation will do is it will put the burden of proof on the people making the investments to prove that they weren't done for political purposes. And I think investing to destroy our energy sector would be very, very difficult to defend.
We see this type of culture war happening across the United States, whether it's in entertainment or in education. You're saying in financial markets and asset management as well. On the asset management side, if you were to see some success here, how significant would it be for the overall movement?
I think it would affect everything. I think it would have an impact on every aspect of the culture war, because a lot of what's out there is being funded by what these companies are doing. You know, for example, Disney, its target market is families. Be implementing this transgender agenda. Now, I'm not saying whether it's a good agenda or a bad agenda. Why is Disney the advocate for it? You saw Disney stock drop, what, 30%? I mean, they lost billions of dollars for their investors. They didn't lose billions of dollars because they have bad theme parks. They actually have very good theme parks. They lost it because they alienated their base. Coke did the same thing with opposing the Georgia voting law and implementing these critical race theory, human resource programs internally at Coke, where you teach your employees that they're either oppressors or oppressed, based solely on their race or their sex, not on anything they've ever done in their life, which is really kind of a ridiculous proposition. Why would you teach your employees they're oppressors or oppressed? I mean, you have to be like a CEO that can't possibly be thinking about the success of your workforce. So you've seen companies really be damaged by these kinds of policies being implemented. And I think if we can take the pressure off of them from the top, from these BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, from these huge investment firms, when we relieve that pressure, I think you're going to see a lot less of this kind of activity. So hopefully, and by the way, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they're already starting to react. BlackRock's now come out and said, oh, our primary obligation is returns for our investors. We're not woke. I mean, all things that they were advocating just a year or two ago. They were, screaming at the top of their lungs how they were these woke ESG companies. Now they're kind of backing off because they see that they might be losing some business. So we'll see what happens. Things are starting, you sort of feel the momentum is generating to take the American private sector and the American financial markets back to where they should be, which is neutral and focused on generating returns. We don't want the financial markets to be a battlefield in the culture war. The left has turned them into a battlefield in the culture war. We need to pull them back to neutrality.
Is there an argument for taking, I believe it's called proxy voting power, whereby these big asset managers can use other people's money, other people's investments to make, decisions for themselves? Like, is there a way to reform this? Should they really be allowed to do this?
So the fiduciary duty bill that I mentioned that ALEC has proposed has a section that specifically says we are taking back all proxy voting authority from every investment firm we use. Florida's already done it. They did it by a resolution in December. I hope every state deprives BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard of their ability to vote any shares. And I hope as individuals we pull back. If you've got investments with BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and many people probably do, pull back your voting rights. Don't let them use them to oppress these companies.
So you can say to these companies, I want my voting rights back, and I vote them. Is it a difficult process?
States can with respect to BlackRock. I think it's harder for individuals to do that, but we need to get to the point where individuals can do that. And I think pressure coming up, if enough customers call the person selling these products, say, look, we'll invest with you, we don't want you to vote our shares. They can only say no to that for so long. They can only lose so much business. And somebody will come up with a product that meets those needs. And when that happens, I think we'll see the power of these investment firms decline materially. And it needs to decline materially and in a hurry.
So, final words, Andy, while we're here at ALEC?
Well, I hope everybody will encourage their state legislators to enact legislation that protects their rights and their values, particularly in red states. To not have their assets or the assets of their states utilized to pursue the agendas of a California or a New York. these far leftist agendas. We need to put an end to that. Look, if they want to do this in California, New York, let them do it. They can pursue whatever agenda they want. But for the rest of the country, we shouldn't have this agenda imposed on us, and that's what's happening today.
Andy Puzder, Second Vote Advisors. Appreciate it. Thank you, Andy.
Glad to be here. Thank you.